Hello, so this is for the subject monetary policy and central banking, and the topic is about IMF or the International Monetary Fund. So we'll be looking at a few pages from the IMF website, imf.org, and then we'll see what IMF is about. So to begin, we have IMF at a glance. All right, so they've updated this March 3, 2021. So the International Monetary Fund, or IMF, promotes international financial stability and monetary cooperation. So, because of international trade, because of transactions between countries, so there is there is the existence of international financial system, and the one essentially trying to promote the international financial stability is the IMF. Okay, so it facilitates international trade, promotes employment and sustainable economic growth, and helps to reduce global poverty. So it's the same, purpose of central bank monetary board, but of course they're on an international level. The IMF is governed by and accountable to its 190 member countries. Okay, so we have some fast facts about the IMF. So it was established in 1944. There are 190 member countries, 150 nationalities represented by their staff, and then 24 executive directors representing 190 member countries. Total amount the IMF is able to lend to its member countries amounts to $1 trillion. And then current lending arrangements, there are 29. Countries that receive emergency financing as of January 29 is 80. And then interest rate on loans to low-income countries is 0. For hands-on technical advice, policy-oriented training, and peer learning, I think they've allotted $303 million for that. Okay. So reading on, founding and mission. The IMF was conceived in July 1944 at the United Nations Bretton Woods Conference in New Hampshire, U.S. The 34 countries in attendance sought to build a framework for international economic cooperation and avoid repeating the competitive currency devaluations that contributed to the Great Depression of the 1930s. So the IMF's primary mission is to ensure the stability of the international monetary system, the system of exchange rates and international payments that enables countries and their citizens to transact with each other. Okay. So for the surveillance, in order to maintain stability and prevent crisis in the international monetary system, the IMF monitors member country policies as well as national, regional, and global economic and financial developments through a formal system known as surveillance. Okay. The IMF provides advice to member countries and promotes policies designed to foster economic stability, reduce vulnerability to economic and financial crisis, and raise living standards. Okay. Essentially, their purpose, their goals are good, right? But it must have been hard to execute. Essentially, they have member countries, and they needed to do a lot of research for them to understand each country's economic situation and to provide those advices and guidance that they're saying they do provide to the member countries. It also provides periodic assessments of global prospects in its World Economic Outlook, of financial markets in its Global Financial Stability Report, of public finance developments in its Fiscal Monitor, and of external positions of the largest economies in its External Sector Report. So they do a lot of these reports, right? So they're essentially probably doing a lot of research on this. And of course, that would take a lot of resources. But they are hopeful that those reports would provide insights into the situations of member countries or different economies, and so that would help member countries in making better decisions and probably improve themselves, right? In addition to a series of regional economic outlooks. Did you know the IMF gives advice on how to achieve economic stability, prevent financial crisis, and improve living standards? So for the financial assistance, they provide loans to member countries that are experiencing actual or potential balance of payments problems actual or potential balance of payments problems is a core responsibility of the IMF. Okay, so they do provide loans. Individual country adjustment programs are designed in close cooperation with the IMF and are supported by IMF financing, and ongoing financial support is dependent on effective implementation of these adjustments. In response to the global economic crisis in April 2009, after the 2008 financial crisis, the IMF strengthened its lending capacity and approved a major overhaul of its financial support mechanisms. Probably during that time, a lot of countries are in need of financing, so IMF probably couldn't, approve everyone's application, so they probably did a lot of changes to that, with additional reforms adopted in subsequent years. These changes enhanced the IMF's crisis prevention toolkit, bolstering its ability to mitigate contagion during systemic crises and allowing it to better tailor instruments to meet the needs of individual member countries. I'm gonna pause a bit because of the dogs. Alright, moving on. In response to the COVID-19 pandemic, the IMF temporarily increased the access limits under emergency financing instruments and the annual limit on overall access under non-concessional resources. The IMF also established the short-term liquidity line to provide a backstop to members with very strong policies and fundamentals. Okay, so probably this one is for countries that have the financial capability but cash flow is a bit constrained, and then you have the other one which is for members that are in great need to combat the pandemic. Okay, provides financial support and works with governments to ensure responsible spending. Normally when governments or countries borrow funds from the IMF, of course the usage of those funds are closely monitored and ensure that those are used for the purpose to which they are borrowed. Okay. Loan resources available to low-income countries were sharply increased in 2009 and more recently since March 2020 in response to the unprecedented demand for concessional financing from the COVID-19 pandemic. Average limits under the IMF's concessional loan facilities were doubled in 2009, reviewed and increased in 2016 when the effectiveness conditions for the 14th review were met, okay, and increased again by 1/3 in 2019 to avoid access erosion and preserve the potential financing contribution of fund programs. Annual access limits for PRGP were temporarily increased in response to the pandemic until very recently. Okay. In addition, zero interest rates and concessional loans were extended through end June 2021, and the interest rate on emergency financing is permanently set at 0, so that should be very helpful. The Catastrophe Containment and Relief Trust, CCRT, was modified to provide debt service relief to the poorest and most vulnerable members. So finally effected and pledged additional loan resources in the amount of SDR 16.9 billion were secured in response to significant demand for concessional financing driven by the pandemic and ensuing economic shocks, because of the lockdown, cessation of business operations. So together with previously available resources, loans to the PRGT are expected to cover commitments under current policies under 2024. So I haven't seen the information yet, but as I understand it, of course, the member countries of the IMF are contributing funds to the IMF. Now, so essentially, IMF is acting like a bank, and then the member countries would have to have deposit accounts or something like that for them to become members and for them to be able to avail the benefits being provided by the IMF. Okay. I think the contributions would depend on the GDP of the country or something. I'll try to find information on that. Okay. Next, we have capacity development. So the IMF provides technical assistance and training to help member countries build better economic institutions and strengthen related human capacity. So mostly the central bank and the people that are there. This includes, for example, designing and implementing more effective policies for taxation and administration, expenditure management, monetary and exchange rate policies, banking and financial system supervision and regulation, legislative frameworks, and economic statistics. So anything to do with the financial system, anything that would affect the financial system, mostly anything related to economics. Okay. IMF works with member countries to modernize their economic policies and institutions. Okay. Of course, there would be suggestions that would apply to one country and would probably not be applicable to another. So, their guidelines or their advice would still largely depend on the result of their research on the current situation of specific country's economy. Okay. SDR, special drawing rights. IMF issues an international reserve asset known as SDR that can supplement the official reserves of member countries participating in the SDR department, currently all members of the IMF. A general allocation of SDRs must be consistent with the objective of meeting the long-term global need for reserve assets and requires Board of Governors approval by an 85% majority of the total voting power. Once agreed, the allocation is distributed to member countries in proportion to their quota shares at the fund. Okay. Total global allocations are currently about SDR 204.2 billion, around $293 billion. Okay. IMF members can voluntarily exchange SDRs for currencies among themselves. Resources. Member quotas are the primary source of IMF financial resources. A member's quota broadly reflects its size and position in the world economy. The IMF regularly conducts general reviews of quotas. The 14th review, which was concluded in 2010 and became effective in 2016, doubled quota resources to SDR 444 billion or around 687 billion USD. The 15th review was concluded in 2020, so they do it 10 years apart, right? With no increase in quota, most likely in consideration of the pandemic that every country is experiencing. In addition to quota resources, credit arrangements between the IMF and a group of members and institutions provide supplementary resources. These arrangements, called New Arrangements to Borrow, NAB and AB, are the main backstop to quotas. On January 16, 2020, the Executive Board agreed on amendments to the NAB, including doubling of its size to $526 billion for a new period from 2021 to 2025. This reform entered into force on January 1, 2021. As a third line of defense, member countries have also committed resources to the IMF through bilateral borrowing agreements. Okay. On March 30, 2020, the Executive Board approved a borrowing framework for a new round of BBAs. Of these, agreements for about $183 have become effective as of February 5, 2021. Okay. Governance and organization. IMF is accountable to its member country governments. At the top of its organizational structure is the Board of Governors, consisting of one governor and one alternate governor from each member country. Usually the top officials from the central bank or finance ministry of each country. The Board of Governors meets once a year at the IMF World Bank annual meetings. 24 of the governors serve on the International Monetary and Financial Committee or IMFC, which advises the IMF's Executive Board on the supervision and management of the international monetary and financial system. The day-to-day work of the IMF is overseen by its 24-member Executive Board, which represents the entire membership and supported by IMF staff. The managing director is the head of the IMF staff and chair of the executive board, and is assisted by 4 deputy managing directors. Okay. So fast facts. Membership again is 190 countries. Headquarters Washington D.C. Executive board 24 directors, each representing a single country or groups of countries. Staff approximately 2,700 from 150 countries. Total quotas 687 billion US dollars. Contributions from the member countries. Borrowed resources envelope 708 billion US dollars. Committed amounts under lending arrangements, so you have 288 billion, of which 136 billion USD has not been drawn. Largest borrowers: Argentina, Egypt, Ukraine, Pakistan. Largest precautionary loans: Mexico, Chile, Colombia. Capacity development spending, we have 303 million USD in 2020, nearly a third of the IMF's total budget. So again, this is in response to the pandemic. Okay. Our primary aims: promote international monetary cooperation, facilitate expansion and balance growth of international trade, promote exchange stability because, member countries, exchange rate between them. Assist in the establishment of a multilateral system of payments and make resources available with adequate safeguards to members experiencing balance of payments difficulties. Okay, so this is the IMF at a glance. Okay, in the next video we'll be discussing about IMF responsibilities. There are 3. We'll divide that into 2 videos. Okay, alright, so that's it for this one. Thanks and bye.